Chapter 1. The Grand Hotel in Deauville stood as a monument of elegance and old-world charm, its vast corridors echoing with the muted conversations of high society. It was here, in this haven of luxury, that tragedy would soon unfold, one that would demand the keen intellect of the great Hercule Poirot. It was an evening of indulgence, the kind where the champagne glasses never emptied, and laughter, though refined, hummed beneath the golden chandeliers. The hotel's ballroom, transformed into a spectacle of music and sophistication, had invited only the most distinguished guests for a private recital by the renowned pianist Stéphane Delacroix. A virtuoso of international repute, Delacroix had long enthralled audiences with his masterful fingers and melancholic compositions. His presence at the Grand Hotel was not merely a performance, but an event. Among the guests were financiers, aristocrats, and artists of considerable acclaim. The air was thick with conversations in French and English, accented by the occasional tinkle of crystal glasses. And then the music began. Stéphane Delacroix, a man of slight build with an air of quiet intensity, took his place at the grand piano. A hush fell over the room as his fingers caressed the keys, weaving a melody so haunting that even the most jaded listener felt its grip. The composition was unfamiliar, something private, personal. A final note trembled into silence, the audience exhaling as if released from a trance. For a brief moment, all was still. Then a sharp gasp. The pianist slumped forward, his body collapsing over the keys in a discordant crash of sound. A woman screamed. Chairs scraped against the polished floor as the crowd rushed forward. Someone shouted for a doctor, but as they lifted Delacroix's body, it became painfully clear. He was dead. A whisper of fear rippled through the room. Murmurs turned to frantic speculation. Had he suffered a heart attack? A stroke? But then the scent of something peculiar, bitter almonds, wafted through the air. Someone recoiled. "Mon Dieu!" breathed a voice. "Poison!" the word cut through the room like a knife. The hotel's gathering storm. By the time the authorities arrived, the Grand Hotel had become a scene of controlled chaos. The guests were confined to the ballroom, the gilded space now feeling more like a prison than a venue of splendor. The police moved with efficiency, questioning staff and guests alike. It was at this moment that Hercule Poirot arrived, dressed impeccably in a grey morning suit, his patent leather shoes gleaming as though freshly polished. He walked into the room with measured precision. A man of method, of order. His egg-shaped head tilted slightly as he observed the scene before him. The scent of perfume and expensive cigars lingered in the air, but beneath it all was the unmistakable stench of death. "Ah," he murmured to himself, "murder!" Beside him, his ever-loyal companion, Captain Arthur Hastings, adjusted his tie, looking rather out of place amidst the haute société. "Poirot, surely this is some terrible accident," Hastings suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. Poirot did not reply immediately. Instead, he approached the body of Stéphane Delacroix, now respectfully covered with a white linen cloth. The pianist's face, pale in death, bore no signs of struggle. But Poirot's keen eyes saw what others had overlooked. His gloved hand hovered over the piano keys, pressing lightly where Delacroix's fingers had last rested. A dissonant note rang out. Curious, Poirot murmured. He died, with his hands on the keys, almost as if he were about to play another note. Hastings frowned. What does that mean? Poirot straightened, his gaze sweeping the room. The guests, now suspects, watched him with wary eyes. There was fear, yes, but something more. Secrets he could sense them, curled tightly beneath layers of propriety. Monsieur Delacroix was not merely a pianist, Poirot announced, his voice carrying through the room. He was a man who knew something, and that knowledge has cost him his life. A murmur of unease rippled through the guests. The pianist's last note had been silence, and that, Poirot knew, was the deadliest melody of all. Chapter 2. The Grand Hotel's ballroom, once filled with the melody of Stéphane Delacroix's final performance, now held only a solemn hush. The pianist's lifeless form had been taken away by the authorities, but the echoes of his tragic end lingered in the grand space. Outside, the sea murmured against the Normandy coastline, indifferent to the mysteries unfolding within. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre of it all, surveying the assembled guests with his sharp, knowing gaze. The room was a tableau of wealth and influence, now marred by the spectre of suspicion. Captain Hastings, ever the faithful companion, leaned in and whispered, "Poirot, the police seem convinced it was poison." But how? He drank nothing during the performance. Poirot tapped a polished shoe against the floor thoughtfully. "You are astute, mon ami. Poison, yes, but not in the usual manner. If it were slipped into a drink or food, the timing would not be so precise. No, this was something more. Deliberate." This chief of police, Inspector Lucien Moreau, approached them, his thick moustache bristling with irritation. "Monsieur Poirot, we appreciate your presence, but we have the situation under control. We will interview the guests, examine the body, and determine the culprit." Poirot inclined his head politely. "Mais oui, Inspector. And yet, I fear you may not see what is in front of you. I should like to speak to those who are closest to Monsieur Delacroix before his untimely demise." Moreau hesitated. Poirot's reputation was well known, and though the inspector bristled at outside interference, he knew better than to refuse the great detective outright. With a begrudging nod, he gestured for the guests to be assembled in a private salon. Chitioué. Suspects were many, but Poirot had already marked a few in his mind. The gathered suspects. The salon, an opulent room with heavy velvet drapes and gilded mirrors, now served as an impromptu interrogation chamber. The suspects, if indeed one of them was the killer, sat in varying degrees of unease. Poirot surveyed them with a critical eye. Madame Céleste Arnaud, a widow of considerable wealth, Madame Arnaud was known for hosting lavish soirees. She had been a patron of Stéphane Delacroix's music, often seen at his performances. Her age had done little to diminish her charm, and even now she held herself with regal poise. Charles Devonshire, an English composer, once a rival of Delacroix, tall, thin, with an air of quiet arrogance, Devonshire had been seen speaking with Delacroix before the performance, an exchange that had not seemed friendly. Lisette Moreau, a young and rising violinist, Lisette had been under Delacroix's tutelage. She was pale now, her fingers twisting the fabric of her dress. Had she been fond of the pianist, or had she despised him? Monsieur Henri Joubert A., wealthy financier and one of Delacroix's known benefactors, a large man with sharp, calculating eyes, Joubert had a reputation for being ruthless in business. Marguerite Beaumont, a journalist for Le Monde Musical. Marguerite had often written scathing reviews of performers she deemed unworthy. Her presence at the recital was unusual. Had she come to witness something beyond mere music? Poirot clasped his hands before him. Mes amis, a terrible tragedy has occurred. A man of great talent is dead. But such events, Hein, they do not happen without reason. And so we must ask, who among us had reason to wish Stéphane Delacroix harm? Silence, a shifting of feet, averted gazes. Poirot's gaze landed on Charles Devonshire. Monsieur Devonshire, you were seen in conversation with the late pianist before the performance. Perhaps you would enlighten us? Devonshire scowled. It was nothing of importance, a simple disagreement over music. Ah, Poirot said mildly. And yet your tone suggests otherwise. Madame Arnaud interrupted, her voice crisp. This is absurd. Why would any of us wish to harm Stéphane? He was a musician, not a politician. Poirot turned to her with a small smile. Indeed, madame. And yet music has its own intrigues, rivalries, jealousies, secrets. Lisette Moreau suddenly spoke, her voice trembling. Monsieur Poirot, Stéphane had been troubled lately. He told me. He feared something, someone. All eyes turned to her. And did he say who? Poirot asked gently. Lisette hesitated, then shook her head. No, only that he had discovered something dangerous. A ripple of unease spread through the group. Poirot's mind raced. If Delacroix had known something that led to his murder, then the question was not just who, but what had he discovered? Poirot's little grey cells tingled with excitement. The game had begun. Chapter 3. The atmosphere in the Grand Hotel salon was thick with tension. The gathered guests, no, the gathered suspects, shifted uneasily in their seats as Hercule Poirot's sharp gaze moved from one face to another, searching for the flicker of truth among the carefully composed expressions. Lisette Moreau's revelation had changed the course of the investigation. Stéphane Delacroix had been afraid. He had known something that had cost him his life. But what? Poirot clasped his hands behind his back and began to pace, his patent leather shoes tapping rhythmically against the parquet floor. Captain Hastings observed the scene with curiosity, though he himself had yet to form any concrete suspicions. "You say, Mademoiselle Moreau," Poirot began, his voice soft yet insistent, "that Monsieur Delacroix was afraid. Tell me, did he confide in you often?" Lisette hesitated. "Not often, no, but he trusted me. He said there was something he had stumbled upon, quite by accident. He didn't say what it was, but he was uneasy. He kept looking over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. And yet he played his final recital without interruption, until his sudden collapse. Curious, n'est-ce pas? Hastings furrowed his brow. "You mean to say, Poirot, that Delacroix might have known he was in danger, but still went ahead with the performance?" "Exactement, mon ami. Which means one of two things. Either he underestimated the threat against him, or he had planned, to reveal something that very night. A ripple of unease moved through the suspects. Madame Celeste Arnaud, her pearl earrings swaying with her movements, cleared her throat delicately. "Forgive me, Monsieur Poirot, but this is all speculation. Do you have any real evidence that suggests Stephen was murdered?" Poirot turned his sharp gaze to her. "Madame, one does not collapse mid-performance from fear alone, and one does not smell of bitter almonds without cause." A chill swept through the room. The mention of bitter almonds, the telltale scent of cyanide, left no room for argument. "Charles," Devonshire scoffed, "so poison then? That still does not tell us how it was administered. If you are implying that one of us slipped something into his drink, I assure you that I was watching him closely throughout the performance." He touched nothing. Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Ah, but there are many ways to deliver poison, mon cher Devonshire. A drink, yes, but also through touch, through the air, perhaps even through the very thing he was playing." The suspects exchanged uncertain glances. Poirot stepped forward, his voice dropping into a whisper of intrigue. "Tell me, does anyone here know if Monsieur Delacroix was in the habit of playing with gloves?" Lisette Moreau answered immediately. "No, never. He said it dulled the sensation of the keys." Poirot nodded as if he had expected this answer. Then, mes amis, I pose to you a question. If his hands were bare, could something have been left upon the keys of the piano? A powder, a residue perhaps, that would transfer onto his fingertips. There was a collective intake of breath. Henri Joubert, the financier, leaned forward, his large hands resting on his knees. "That is possible, is it not?" "More than possible," Poirot said. "It is probable. Cyanide, in small doses, can be absorbed through the skin. If someone coated the keys, particularly the lower octaves that Monsieur Delacroix would strike with force, it would have taken mere minutes for the poison to enter his system." Marguerite Beaumont, the journalist, gave a sharp exhale. "But that would mean the murderer had access to the piano before the recital began." "Just so, Mademoiselle Beaumont. And who had such access? That is what we must determine." A long silence followed. The implications were clear. One among them had prepared the piano as a murder weapon. Poirot turned back to Lisette. "Mademoiselle, when you said Monsieur Delacroix feared for his life, did he mention anyone specific? Anyone he had quarrelled with?" Lisette shook her head. "Not directly, but—" she hesitated, then sighed. "He had been arguing with someone over the past few weeks, someone who had threatened to ruin his career." Poirot leaned in. "And who was this person, mademoiselle?" Lisette swallowed hard, her gaze flickering to one of the guests, Charles Devonshire. All eyes turned to Devonshire, who scowled deeply. "Ridiculous!" he snapped. "Yes, I argued with Delacroix. He was insufferable, always dismissing my compositions as inferior. But that does not mean I murdered him." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps, monsieur, but it does make you an interesting person of interest." Devonshire looked around the room, anger flashing in his eyes. "If you're looking for people who had issues with Delacroix, why not ask Henri Joubert? He funded Stephen's last tour, only for the pianist to cut ties with him unexpectedly. Or Marguerite Beaumont. Her last review of him was so scathing it nearly ended his career." Henri Joubert crossed his arms. his expression unreadable. Marguerite, on the other hand, stiffened. Poirot smiled faintly. Indeed, many people had reason to dislike Monsieur Delacroix, but only one of them feared what he had discovered. He clasped his hands together. Messieurs et mesdames, I believe it is time we examined the piano itself. With that, Poirot led the way, back to the ballroom, his little grey cells already working at full speed. The truth was there, hidden among the notes of the pianist's last song, and Poirot was determined to find it. Chapter 4. The Grand Hotel's ballroom had taken on a different character in the wake of Stéphane Delacroix's tragic death. Where before it had been filled with music and celebration, now it stood eerily silent, its grand piano sitting like a silent witness to murder, the chandelier's golden light reflected off the polished keys, an illusion of normalcy that belied the sinister truth hidden within. Poirot moved toward the instrument with measured steps, his keen eyes sweeping over the surface of the glossy, black frame. The gathered suspects, now fully aware of their predicament, stood a short distance away, watching him with guarded expressions. Inspector Lucien Moreau, who had been sceptical of Poirot's involvement, finally spoke. Monsieur Poirot, you truly believe that the poison was administered through the piano? Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he removed a pair of pristine white gloves from his pocket and slipped them onto his hands before lowering himself to the bench. Hastings, standing just beside him, cleared his throat uncomfortably. I say, Poirot, you're not planning on playing, are you? Poirot merely smiled. Non, mon ami, I leave such artistry to the gifted. My role is one of observation. Fingers hovered over the keys, mimicking the movements of a pianist without actually pressing down. He traced the lower octaves, the deep, booming notes that Stéphane Delacroix had favoured in his final performance. Then, very carefully, he withdrew a fine white handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the surface of a few selected keys. Holding the fabric up to the light, he examined it closely. A faint smudge, barely visible, marked the cloth. Poirot's eyes glittered. Ah! Inspector Moreau stepped forward, his irritation melting into curiosity. What is it? Poirot turned to him. Inspector, I suggest you send this cloth for chemical analysis. I suspect you will find traces of a fast-acting cyanide compound, one that dissolves upon contact with the skin. A murmur of astonishment rippled through the group. So it was on the keys? Hastings breathed. Oui, Poirot confirmed. Placed strategically, no doubt, to ensure Monsieur Delacroix's hands would come into contact with it during his performance. The murderer must have applied it before the recital began, knowing it would take effect at the most dramatic moment. Moreau called for one of his officers to take the handkerchief, barking orders in rapid French. Poirot, meanwhile, stood from the piano bench and turned his attention back to the assembled guests. And now, mes amis, we must ask, who among you had access to this instrument before the recital? A heavy silence. Then Marguerite Beaumont, the journalist, cleared her throat. The piano was placed here yesterday afternoon for the performance. The hotel staff had it moved in, but only the maestro himself touched it after that. Poirot's head tilted slightly. Are you certain, Mademoiselle Beaumont? She hesitated. Well, except for one person. I saw someone near the piano shortly before the recital began. Everyone stiffened. "Who?" Moreau demanded. Marguerite's lips parted, but she hesitated, her gaze flickering toward Charles. "Devonshire." Poirot caught the look immediately. "Ah, Monsieur Devonshire, we meet again." Devonshire stiffened. "This is absurd." "Yes, I was near the piano. I had placed a sheet of music on the stand before the performance. That is all." "And did you touch the keys?" Poirot pressed. "No, why would I?" Poirot studied him, but before he could respond, another voice cut through the room. "I was near the piano, too." All eyes turned to Madame Celeste Arnaud. She stood tall, her pearl necklace catching the chandelier's glow, her face unreadable. "I spoke to Stephan before the recital. We had a personal matter to discuss." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And did you touch the instrument?" She exhaled slowly. "I may have brushed my hand against it, but I swear I did not poison him." The tension in the room became suffocating. Poirot knew the murderer was among them, but which of them had the most to gain? Henri Joubert, who had lost a significant investment in Delacroix. Marguerite Beaumont, whose career could have been ruined by the pianist. Charles Devonshire, the scorned rival. Or Madame Arnaud, whose connection to Delacroix remained a mystery. Poirot turned back to the piano, his mind working through the possibilities. The poison had been carefully placed, designed to act at the perfect moment. That meant planning, intelligence, precision. And then a thought struck him. "Monsieur Moreau," Poirot said suddenly, "I require two things immediately. First, a list of everyone who handled this piano before the performance. And second," he turned to the suspects, his voice lowering to a near whisper, "every single letter or note that Stephan Delacroix received in the past month." A stunned silence followed. Poirot smiled. "The answers, mes amis, are already before us. It is only a matter of time." The game was narrowing, and the truth was drawing closer. Chapter 5. The Grand Hotel's opulence, once a setting for leisure and indulgence, now felt like the stage of a carefully orchestrated tragedy. Hercule Poirot sat in one of the velvet armchairs of the salon, his fingers steepled, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular. His mind, however, was anything but idle. A poisoned pianist, a tainted instrument, and a room full of suspects, all with their own secrets. The murderer had been precise, calculating. But there was one thing they had not anticipated: Poirot's little grey cells. Inspector Moreau had wasted no time retrieving the list Poirot requested. Those who had access to the piano before the recital. The names were as follows: the hotel staff, who moved the piano into the ballroom; Stephan Delacroix himself; the victim, Charles Devonshire, who had admitted to placing a sheet of music on the stand; Madame Celeste Arnaud, who confessed to speaking with Delacroix near the piano; Lisette Moreau, who had assisted Delacroix with minor preparations before the performance. Poirot's gaze lingered on the names. Two of the people on this list had already admitted to touching the piano, but their reactions did not suggest guilt, at least not yet. What he needed now were the letters. A secret in the notes Moreau returned with a small locked leather case, retrieved from Delacroix's hotel suite. "The victim's personal correspondence," he said, placing it on the table. His manager provided it, though he claimed there was nothing of interest. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Nothing of interest. Ah, mon cher inspector, how often do the most damning clues hide in what appears unremarkable?" He unclasped the case, lifting out a neat stack of envelopes. Hastings leaned over, his curiosity piqued. "Anything suspicious?" he asked. Poirot scanned the envelopes with the precision of a jeweller examining fine gems. There were letters from admirers, invitations to perform, and correspondence from music publishers, all seemingly ordinary. Then he found it, a letter, unsigned, written in a hurried scrawl. The paper was slightly crumpled, as if Delacroix had handled it often. Poirot unfolded it and read aloud, "You do not know what you have discovered, but if you speak of it, you will not live to see another performance." A shudder passed through the room. Hastings exhaled sharply. "Good Lord, that's a direct threat." "Indeed," Poirot murmured. And yet Monsieur Delacroix did not heed it. That tells us two things. First, he did not know exactly what he had stumbled upon. Second, he did not fear the threat enough to remain silent. Moreau snatched the letter from Poirot's hand, frowning. "No signature, no return address. How are we to know who sent it?" Poirot merely smiled. "Ah, but the truth has a way of revealing itself, n'est-ce pas?" He turned back to the suspects. "Tell me, mes amis, did any of you know of this letter?" Silence. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Come now. Someone here must have known that Stéphane Delacroix was in possession of dangerous knowledge." "Lisette." Moreau bit her lip, then hesitantly spoke. I saw him reading a letter one evening in the lobby. He looked troubled, but when I asked, he brushed me off." Poirot nodded approvingly. "And when was this, mademoiselle?" "2 nights before the recital." "2 nights," Poirot murmured. "Then it is likely that whatever Monsieur Delacroix discovered, he found it very recently." Madame Celeste Arnaud, who had been quiet until now, shifted in her seat. "Monsieur Poirot, this is all very intriguing, but what are you suggesting? That Stéphane was murdered not because of rivalry or jealousy, but because he knew something?" Poirot's lips curled into a smile. "Ah, madame, you see it now. But the question remains, what did he know?" The missing piece Poirot rose from his seat, moving back towards the grand piano. He ran a gloved hand along the instrument, his fingers resting lightly on the sheet music still placed upon the stand. Then, very slowly, he turned the pages. Hastings blinked. "Poirot, what are you looking for?" Poirot did not answer immediately. His fingers traced the notations on the sheet music. Then, suddenly, he stopped. There, between 2 pages, was something that did not belong. A folded slip of paper, yellowed with age. Poirot removed it delicately and unfolded it. His eyes scanned the faded ink, and for the first time something flickered across his face. Satisfaction. Hastings peered over his shoulder. "What is it?" Poirot turned, holding up the fragile document. "It is the missing piece, mon ami." Moreau stepped forward. "Let me see that." Poirot did not hand it over just yet. Instead, he addressed the room. "This, mes amis, is why Stéphane Delacroix was murdered. This is what he discovered, quite by accident, I believe. A document, long forgotten, hidden among the pages of his music. A letter that someone did not want to see the light of day." Moreau, growing impatient, took the document and scanned it. His eyes widened. Mon Dieu! Hastings frowned. Well, what does it say? Moreau exhaled. It's an old contract, a financial agreement, dated nearly 20 years ago. Poirot nodded. A contract that, I suspect, implicates someone in this very room. A ripple of shock passed through the suspects. Moreau's gaze snapped toward Henri Joubert. This is your signature, is it not? Joubert paled. The room seemed to tighten around them, as if the walls themselves were listening. Poirot clasped his hands together, his voice calm but deliberate. Monsieur Joubert, it seems that years ago you made a financial deal that you wished to keep hidden, and yet, by sheer coincidence, it found its way into the hands of Stéphane Delacroix. Joubert's lips thinned. I don't know what you're talking about. Poirot sighed. Ah, but you do, monsieur. And so I must ask, were you so desperate to keep this secret that you would kill to protect it? The silence that followed was deafening. Chapter 6. The salon of the Grand Hotel had become a courtroom of sorts, with Hercule Poirot presiding over a jury of the guilty and the innocent alike. The discovery of the old contract had sent shockwaves through the room, and all eyes were now fixed on Henri Joubert, the powerful financier whose name was scrawled at the bottom of the document. Joubert sat stiffly in his chair, his fingers clasped together so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The once confident businessman now resembled a cornered animal. "This is absurd," he said, his voice lacking its usual strength. "I don't see how this document, whatever it is, has anything to do with Stéphane Delacroix's death." Poirot tilted his head slightly, his keen eyes studying the man's every movement. "Ah, but that is where you are mistaken, Monsieur Joubert. This contract, dated 20 years ago, was something that Monsieur Delacroix stumbled upon purely by chance. And I believe, in your haste to silence him, you resorted to the most desperate act of all." The room held its breath. Joubert's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Moreau, standing beside Poirot, turned the document over in his hands. This contract, it appears to be a financial agreement regarding the ownership of a piece of music, a composition, to be precise. He looked up sharply. A stolen composition. Hastings let out a low whistle. "You mean to say Delacroix discovered proof that someone had stolen music and claimed it as their own?" "Precisely," Poirot confirmed. "And not just anyone. Someone who was wealthy, powerful, and capable of keeping such a secret hidden for years." His gaze settled back on Joubert. Madame Celeste Arnaud, who had been observing quietly, suddenly spoke, her voice edged with realization. "Wait, are you saying that Monsieur Joubert had something to do with Stéphane's music?" Poirot gave a small nod. "No, madame, not Stéphane's music, but music that once belonged to another." A stunned silence, then a sharp intake of breath from Charles Devonshire. His eyes widened, his face paling. "Good God! Are you suggesting—" Poirot turned to him. "You are a composer yourself, are you not, Monsieur Devonshire? Tell me, how valuable is an unpublished masterpiece?" Devonshire swallowed. "It could be worth a fortune, especially if the composer is long dead and their work was never heard." Poirot smiled. "Just so." He turned back to Joubert. "Monsieur Joubert, 20 years ago, a composer, one whose name I suspect has long been forgotten, entrusted their work to you. And instead of honouring that trust, you took it. You sold it. And now, when fate conspired to reveal the truth, you resorted to murder." Joubert's face darkened, but he remained silent. Poirot continued. Stéphane Delacroix, a man of music, must have been going through his sheet music when he discovered this old contract, perhaps tucked away in an old book or manuscript. He did not fully understand its significance at first, but the name at the bottom of the page, your name, must have troubled him. He began asking questions. And that, Monsieur Joubert, was his mistake. Joubert's fists clenched. "This is all speculation." Poirot raised a finger. "No, monsieur, this is deduction, and allow me to prove it." Reconstructing the crime, Poirot turned back to the suspects. "Mes amis, let us consider how this murder was carried out." He began to pace, speaking slowly, deliberately. Monsieur Delacroix was poisoned with cyanide, not in a drink, not in food, but through his very own piano. The poison was left on the keys, absorbed into the skin as he played. A clever method, one that ensured the crime would be invisible until it was too late. He paused. And yet, this method required precision. It had to be done shortly before the performance, otherwise the poison might fade. Which means... He turned, eyes locking onto Joubert. It had to be placed there by someone who had access to the piano shortly before the recital began. Joubert sneered. "You already said that others touched the piano." "Oui, but they did not linger. You, however, Monsieur Joubert, were seen near the stage minutes before the recital began. A simple inquiry with the hotel staff will confirm that, I am sure." Joubert's expression flickered, just for a second. But Poirot caught it. "Ah," he murmured, "it was you." A ripple of shock spread through the room. Lisette Moreau gasped. You killed Stéphane?" Joubert's mask of calm cracked. That fool had no idea what he had in his hands. He was going to ruin everything. He had no right to... He stopped himself, breathing heavily. Poirot's voice softened. "He had every right, monsieur. You took something that did not belong to you, and when the truth threatened to come to light, you silenced the one man who could expose you." Joubert's hands trembled. Then, as if realizing the weight of his confession, he let out a hollow laugh. "So what now, Poirot? Do you expect me to apologize?" Poirot merely inclined his head. "No, monsieur. I expect you to face justice." Moreau stepped forward, nodding to his officers. "Henri Joubert, you are under arrest for the murder of Stéphane Delacroix." The financier straightened his cuffs as if trying to retain his dignity. "A pity," he murmured. "I really did enjoy his music." Poirot watched as the man was led away, his sharp mind already filing away the details of the case. Another puzzle solved, another murderer unmasked. As the room settled, Hastings exhaled in relief. "Well, Poirot, I must say, this was one of the most elaborate crimes I've seen. Poisoning through a piano. Who thinks of such things?" Poirot gave a small, knowing smile. "Ah, mon ami, the mind of a murderer is a fascinating thing. But in the end, it is always the smallest detail that betrays them." He glanced at the grand piano one last time, as if offering a silent farewell to the instrument that had played, the final notes of a tragic symphony. Then, with a satisfied nod, he straightened his cuffs and turned to leave. "Come, Hastings, the music has ended. and so has the mystery. Chapter 7. The scandal of Stéphane Delacroix's murder spread through Deauville like wildfire. The Grand Hotel, once a sanctuary for the elite, had become the setting of a tale whispered in hushed tones over fine dinners and late-night cigars. Though Henri Joubert had been taken into custody, Poirot's mind remained restless. There was something unfinished. Seated in the hotel's quiet lounge, Poirot delicately stirred his coffee, his gaze fixed on the swirling liquid. Across from him, Captain Hastings sighed, setting down that morning's newspaper. "Well, Poirot, I should think you'd be pleased with yourself. Another crime solved, another villain caught, and yet you have that look." Poirot lifted an eyebrow. "What look, mon ami?" "The look you get when something still bothers you." Poirot tapped his spoon against the edge of his cup and exhaled. "Tell me, Hastings, what do you make of Henri Joubert?" Hastings shrugged. "A scoundrel, certainly. I still can't believe he killed Delacroix just to keep an old secret hidden." Poirot nodded slowly. "Oui, and yet something does not fit." Hastings frowned. "What do you mean?" Poirot set down his cup and leaned forward slightly. "Murder, Hastings, is not merely an action. It is a matter of psychology. Consider Joubert's actions. He took a great risk, non? Coating the piano, keys with poison required careful planning. And yet he seemed impatient, rash." Hastings frowned, but he confessed. Poirot's lips curled into a small smile. "Ah, but only after being cornered. That, mon ami, is not the same as true guilt." Hastings sat back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "Wait, you think Joubert didn't do it?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he retrieved a small notebook from his pocket and flipped through the pages, filled with his careful observations. "Tell me, Hastings," Poirot mused, "who among the suspects seemed truly afraid?" Hastings thought for a moment. Well, Lisette Moreau was nervous, and Charles Devonshire was furious, but I wouldn't say either of them were afraid. "Just so," Poirot said, "and yet there was one person who showed something more than nervousness, one who, when faced with the crime, reacted not just with shock, but with true dread." Hastings blinked. "Who?" Poirot closed his notebook and stood. "Come, my friend, there is one more truth to uncover." A second crime in the night at Deterton evening, the Grand Hotel was quieter than usual. The guests, still unnerved by the recent events, had retired early. The corridors were dimly lit, the chandeliers casting long, flickering shadows. But Poirot did not sleep. Instead, he waited, and at precisely 3 o'clock in the morning, his patience was rewarded. A faint noise, a door creaking open. Poirot, seated in an armchair near the hallway, remained perfectly still. His sharp eyes tracked the shadowy figure that moved swiftly across the corridor, their steps quick and cautious. He rose silently, following them at a careful distance. The figure slipped through the door leading to the ballroom. Poirot pressed, himself against the wall, listening. A rustling sound, the whisper of fabric. Then a soft gasp. Poirot stepped inside. "Ah," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "I thought I might find you here, Mademoiselle Moreau." Lisette. Moreau froze. She was standing beside the grand piano, her trembling hands clutching something small. A glass vial. She turned to him, eyes wide with terror. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, I can explain." Poirot held up a hand. "No, mademoiselle, no more lies." Hastings, who had arrived behind Poirot, gasped. "Good heavens, you're the real murderer?" Lisette's eyes filled with tears. "No, you don't understand. I didn't want him to die." Poirot stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Then tell me, mademoiselle, tell me the truth." Lisette looked down at the vial in her hands. She swallowed hard, then spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I only meant to scare him." Poirot tilted his head slightly. "Go on." She exhaled shakily. "Stéphane, he wasn't the man you all thought he was. He took things, ideas, music, not just from Henri Joubert, but from others. He claimed them as his own." Hastings frowned. "Are you saying he stole your work?" Lisette's lip trembled. "Not just mine. Many young musicians. He promised to help us, to mentor us. But in the end, he only ever took." Poirot studied her intently. "And you wished to make him suffer for it?" She shook her head violently. "No, I swear, I only wanted to frighten him. I put the poison on the keys, but in a much smaller dose. Just enough to make him feel ill. I thought, if he got sick in the middle of his performance, it would ruin his reputation. He'd be exposed for what he was." Poirot's voice remained calm. "And yet, mademoiselle, he died." Tears spilled down Lisette's cheeks. "I don't know how. I didn't use that much poison. I swear, it shouldn't have killed him." Poirot nodded slowly. "Because, mademoiselle, someone else ensured that it did." Lisette gasped. "You mean someone else poisoned him too?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Precisely." Hastings blinked. "Wait! So there were 2 attempts to poison him." Poirot sighed. "One meant to humiliate, and one meant to kill." A heavy silence filled the ballroom. Lisette collapsed into a chair, her face buried in her hands. "I never wanted him dead. I just wanted justice." Poirot placed a hand on her shoulder. "Justice, mademoiselle, is not for us to take in our own hands." Hastings exhaled. "So, if Lisette didn't actually kill Delacroix, then the real murderer is still out there." Poirot's expression darkened. "Oui, mon ami, and I believe we are closer than ever to revealing their identity." His little grey cells tingled with certainty. The final act of the mystery was about to begin, and the true murderer would soon have nowhere left to hide. Chapter 8. The revelation of Lisette Moreau's actions had shifted the course of the investigation. Hercule Poirot now knew that 2 attempts had been made to poison Stéphane Delacroix. One meant to shame, the other meant to kill. But the true murderer had yet to be revealed. Lisette, still shaken, sat hunched in a chair in the ballroom, clutching the glass vial she had attempted to retrieve. Poirot stood before her, his sharp gaze never leaving her face. "You say you only meant to make him ill," Poirot repeated, his voice gentle yet firm. "And yet, mademoiselle, if that were true, why return here in the middle of the night?" Lisette swallowed hard. I realized what I had done. When you said he had died from cyanide poisoning, I couldn't believe it. I knew I had used only a small amount. I had to see if there was any left on the keys. to prove to myself that it wasn't me who killed him." Poirot nodded, as if satisfied with her answer. "And yet, mademoiselle, what you have discovered tonight is far more important than you realize." Hastings, still struggling to keep up with Poirot's deductions, furrowed his brow. "I say, Poirot, what exactly have we discovered?" Poirot turned, hands clasped behind his back as he began to pace. "We have learned that Lisette's poison was not enough to kill. This tells us that someone else, someone who truly wanted Monsieur Delacroix dead, administered a far stronger dose." Hastings's eyes widened. "So we're back where we started. Who was it?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, mon ami, we are no longer at the beginning. We are at the end." He turned back to Lisette. "Tell me, mademoiselle, who knew of your plan?" Lisette shook her head. "No one. I swear it." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Think carefully, mademoiselle. Did anyone see you near the piano, before the recital? Did you tell anyone at all, what you intended to do?" Lisette hesitated. Her lips parted slightly, as if something had just occurred to her. I didn't tell anyone," she said slowly. "But someone did see me near the piano." Poirot leaned in. "Who?" She swallowed. "Madame Arnaud." A web of deception. Poirot turned on his heel, his mind racing. Madame Celeste Arnaud, the wealthy widow, the patron of the arts, the woman who had remained poised and composed throughout the investigation, had seen Lisette tampering with the piano. Had she, in that moment, realized the perfect opportunity to commit murder? Hastings exhaled sharply. "Madame Arnaud? But why would she want Delacroix dead?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he gestured for Lisette to follow him. "Come, mademoiselle. We must not waste time." The three of them made their way through the dimly lit corridors of the Grand Hotel. Poirot moved with purpose, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. Hastings hurried to keep up, still processing the revelation. At last, they arrived outside Madame Arnaud's suite. Poirot knocked. There was no answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. Poirot's gaze darkened. "Mademoiselle Moreau, fetch Inspector Moreau at once." Lisette hurried away. Hastings, now fully alert, turned to Poirot. "You think she's fled?" Poirot shook his head. "No. If she is truly guilty, she will have anticipated this moment." Moments later, Inspector Moreau arrived, followed by two uniformed officers. Without hesitation, Moreau knocked once, then signalled his men to enter. The door swung open. Inside, the room was empty, but it was clear that Madame Arnaud had packed hastily. A suitcase lay open on the bed, half filled with expensive clothing. A jewellery box sat on the dressing table, its contents scattered as if in a rush, and on the desk a single sheet of paper. Poirot stepped forward and picked it up. "Monsieur Poirot, you are too clever. But even you will not catch me. I have no regrets. He deserved it. Au revoir." Hastings read over Poirot's shoulder, aghast. "She's running." Poirot set the note down carefully. "Oui, mon ami, but she has made one mistake." Moreau's men searched the room quickly. One of the officers rushed back. "Inspector, the concierge says Madame Arnaud left not 10 minutes ago. She took a carriage to the train station." Moreau swore under his breath. Then we must go. Immediately. Poirot nodded. Bon, but hurry, Inspector. If she boards that train, we may never see her again. The final chase, the Deauville train. Station was not far, but the late hour meant few passengers lingered on the platform. Poirot, Hastings, and Moreau rushed into the station, scanning the area frantically. There! Cried Hastings, pointing toward the far end of the platform. A figure, wrapped in an elegant travelling coat, was stepping towards the departing train. A gloved hand gripped a leather suitcase, Madame Celeste Arnaud. Moreau barked an order to his men. Stop her! The officers sprinted forward just as the train's whistle pierced the air. The locomotive shuddered, steam hissing as it prepared to depart. Poirot, moving faster than one might expect, stepped in front of Madame Arnaud before she could board. She froze, their eyes met. For a long moment she simply looked at him. Then, with a tired sigh, she set down her suitcase. You never intended to let me go, did you, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot inclined his head. No, madame. Murder is not something that can be washed away with an escape. Her shoulders sagged slightly. I suppose I knew that. Moreau's men took her into custody. She did not resist. As she was led away, Hastings turned to Poirot, still in disbelief. But why, Poirot? Why did she do it? Poirot's expression was unreadable, because, mon ami, Stéphane Delacroix was more than just a pianist to her. He was someone she once loved, and he betrayed her. Hastings was stunned. Betrayed her? Poirot nodded. Years ago, Delacroix promised to marry her, to share a life together. But when he achieved fame, he abandoned her, left her behind without a second thought. She never forgave him. And when she saw Lisette tampering with the piano, she saw an opportunity for revenge. Hastings exhaled. Good heavens! Poirot adjusted his cuffs. And so, mon ami, the final note has been played. Justice is served. As the train departed without its intended passenger, Poirot turned away, already thinking of his next case. The music had ended, and with it, another mystery was solved. Chapter 9. The train station remained eerily quiet long after. The authorities had taken Madame Celeste Arnaud away. The steam from the departing locomotive still lingered in the air, dissipating into the cold night as Hercule Poirot watched it vanish into the distance. Hastings pulled his coat tightly around him. Well, Poirot, I must say, I didn't expect the case to take such a turn, to think that revenge was the true motive after all. Poirot remained silent for a moment, his sharp gaze fixed on the railway tracks, his little grey cells still active. Moreau, standing beside him, exhaled deeply. A tragic ending for her, but she confessed readily once confronted. The courts will show little mercy. Poirot turned slightly, his expression unreadable. Oui, Inspector. She confessed, and yet... Hastings frowned. Poirot, what is it? You don't still think there's something missing, do you? Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, his eyes narrowing. Something does not sit well with me, Hastings. Moreau scoffed. Monsieur Poirot, we have the murderer. Madame Arnaud admitted to poisoning Delacroix. What more is there to uncover? Poirot tilted his head slightly. Tell me, Inspector, did she confess to poisoning him? Moreau blinked. Well, She admitted that she had no regrets. She said he deserved to die. Poirot gave a small nod. Oui. She admitted that she hated him, that she wished him dead. But, mon cher inspecteur, did she ever explicitly state that she was the one who put the cyanide on the piano keys? Moreau hesitated. Hastings looked startled. But, Poirot, surely, if she was running, it means she was guilty. Poirot sighed. Non, Hastings, it only means that she feared something. The weight of his words settled over them like a thick fog. Hastings shook his head. But we saw the letter she left. She practically confessed. Poirot turned sharply. No, mon ami. She confessed to hating him, but not to murder. Moreau frowned. Then what are you suggesting, Poirot? Poirot's voice was calm but firm. That the real murderer is still free. A stunned silence followed. Hastings paled. You mean to say we've arrested the wrong person? Poirot shook his head. No, Madame Arnaud is guilty, but not of murder. She intended to run because she feared what would happen if the truth came out. She knew that if she stayed, she would become the perfect scapegoat. Moreau's frustration was evident. Then, if she did not do it, who did? Poirot's expression darkened. Someone who played this game with far more cunning than we realized. Someone who knew how to manipulate emotions, how to create diversions, how to make sure the suspicion never fell on them. Hastings exhaled sharply. Then, Poirot, we're back to the beginning. Poirot shook his head. No, mon ami, we are at the final act. He turned on his heel, his pace brisk as he made his way back toward the hotel. Come, Hastings. There is one last interview I must conduct, and after that, the final truth will be revealed. Hastings hurried after him. And who, pray, are we interviewing? Poirot's voice was quiet but firm. Charles Devonshire, the final suspect. The Grand Hotel had fallen into a hushed stillness when Poirot and Hastings returned. The staff moved with careful precision, avoiding eye contact, as if fearing they, too, might become suspects in Poirot's relentless pursuit of the truth. Charles Devonshire sat in the lounge, a drink in his hand, his fingers absently swirling the amber liquid. He did not look up when Poirot and Hastings approached. I wondered when you'd come, he murmured. Poirot settled into the chair across from him. Ah, monsieur, you are most perceptive. Devonshire finally lifted his gaze, his expression unreadable. You believe I killed him? Poirot inclined his head slightly. Monsieur Devonshire, you and Monsieur Delacroix were rivals, were you not? Devonshire gave a humourless chuckle, if you can call it that. He never saw me as his equal. He never saw anyone as his equal. Poirot's gaze remained steady. Tell me, monsieur, where were you precisely 1 hour before the recital? Devonshire's grip on his glass tightened slightly. I was in my suite, alone. Poirot smiled faintly. A most convenient alibi. Devonshire leaned forward slightly, his eyes sharp. Tell me, Poirot, if you're so sure that I killed him, then how did I do it? Poirot exhaled. You took advantage of a situation presented to you. You knew that Lisette Moreau intended to use a small dose of poison. But you saw an opportunity. You doubled it, perhaps even tripled it. You ensured that the moment Stéphane Delacroix played his final note, his fate was sealed. Hastings inhaled sharply. "Good Lord," Devonshire smirked. "You have quite the imagination." Poirot leaned back. "Ah, but it is not just imagination, monsieur. It is evidence." Devonshire's expression remained composed, but Poirot could see the tension in his fingers. Poirot continued, his voice calm but relentless. "You two had access to the piano before the recital. You claimed you placed a sheet of music on the stand. But what if, in that moment, you also added something more?" Hastings whispered, "Another layer of poison." Devonshire's jaw tightened. Poirot's voice dropped lower. "You knew that if Delacroix became ill, suspicion would fall on Lisette, and if he died, well, you could make sure someone else took the blame. And who better than a woman scorned, one who had every reason to hate him?" Devonshire's hand clenched around his glass. Poirot sighed. "But there is one thing you did not account for." Devonshire exhaled sharply. "And what is that?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Me." Silence. Then Devonshire moved. In a flash, he grabbed the heavy glass in his hand and hurled it toward Poirot. Hastings cried out, but Poirot simply ducked. The glass shattered against the fireplace behind him. Moreau's men stormed into the lounge, guns drawn. Devonshire's face twisted in rage. "Damn you, Poirot!" Poirot adjusted his cuffs. "Ah, monsieur, such dramatics are unnecessary." Moreau stepped forward. "Charles Devonshire, you are under arrest for the murder of Stephen Delacroix." Devonshire exhaled sharply, his fury fading into a bitter smirk. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for, Poirot." Poirot merely bowed his head. "Merci, monsieur, but in the end, the truth always reveals itself." Devonshire was led away, and as the weight of the case settled, Poirot allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. Hastings, still shaken, turned to Poirot. "And that's the end of it, then?" Poirot smiled. "Oui, mon ami. The final note has been played." And with that, the case of the pianist's last note was closed. Chapter 10. The storm had passed. With Charles Devonshire arrested and the truth finally unearthed, the Grand Hotel was beginning to return to its usual elegance. The scandal would linger, of course. Whispers over breakfast, furtive glances exchanged in gilded hallways. But time would smooth the ripples of even the most shocking of crimes. Hercule Poirot, however, was not one to dwell on past victories. He sat in the lounge with Hastings, savouring a cup of rich, dark coffee. Across from them, Inspector Moreau stood, arms crossed, shaking his head in reluctant admiration. "I must admit, Poirot," Moreau said, "you were right. I was so certain Madame Arnaud was our killer." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, mon cher Inspector, you were not alone in that assumption. It was, after all, what our true murderer intended." Hastings sighed. "So it was Devonshire all along. But tell me, Poirot, when did you first suspect him?" Poirot set his coffee down, his fingers lightly tapping the rim of his cup. "From the beginning, Hastings. There was always something off. Consider the way he spoke of Delacroix. Resentment, bitterness. Yet he was careful never to appear too emotional. He played the role of the rival well, but there was calculation beneath his words." Hastings frowned. "But what convinced you he was guilty?" Poirot smiled. Ah, Hastings, think. The key to this mystery was not just the poison, but the opportunity. He leaned forward. Lisette Moreau confessed to using a small amount of poison, merely to make Delacroix ill, and yet he died. That meant someone had added to the poison. But who? Someone who had access to the piano shortly before the performance. Moreau nodded. Devonshire admitted to placing sheet music on the piano stand. Just so, Poirot said. He used that moment to coat the keys with an even deadlier dose of cyanide. He knew Lisette's tampering would mask his own actions. If Delacroix had only fallen ill, she would be blamed. If he died, well, there was always Madame Arnaud, the perfect scapegoat. Hastings exhaled. A double misdirection. He almost got away with it. Poirot shook his head. Non, mon ami. He failed in one key detail, his ego. He was too eager to distance himself from Delacroix's death, too willing to push suspicion toward others, and when faced with the evidence, he lost control. A guilty man always does. Moreau sighed. A complex case, Poirot, but thanks to you, justice has prevailed. Poirot inclined his head. Mais oui, Inspector. Justice, like music, must follow its proper course. Moreau took his leave, and as he departed, Hastings leaned back in his chair, shaking his head with a chuckle. Well, Poirot, another case solved. What now? Poirot smoothed his cuffs, a gleam of amusement in his eyes. Now, mon ami, we enjoy our coffee, and perhaps for once we take a well-deserved rest. Hastings smiled. No more mysteries for a while. Poirot sipped his coffee, a small smile playing on his lips. Ah, Hastings, one never knows when the next note of mystery will strike. As the soft hum of a distant piano filled the hotel, once more Poirot allowed himself a rare moment of peace. For now, at least, the music had ended. The case is closed.